Good morning and welcome to the third year of Creating Sustainable Supply Chains by the Logistics Point. Today we have prepared a very interesting selections of speakers for you. First, we'll be joined by Paul Sweeney from Descartes, looking at the sustainability and of delivery fleets. Later on, we'll have a few presentations on packaging as well as recycling. We will take a look into the sustainable construction and commercial real estate with British Land. We will also talk about ChatGPT and AI in logistics together with Microsoft. I will be bringing Paul in just a second on the stream. Paul, good morning.
Hi, good morning, Nick.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. And as well as your slides are here. Thank you very much, and the stage is yours.
Okay, thank you, Nick. Hi, good morning, all. And as Nick said, Paul Sweeney, I head up the Fleet Solutions business line for Descartes in Europe. And a lot of our focus within Descartes is obviously in logistics and providing solutions for supply chains and logistics, and in particular, the world of last mile delivery as well. So what I wanted to do this morning was just spend a few minutes here just focusing on transitioning customers to sustainable delivery and really looking at that from a point of view of transitioning your customers to that sustainable delivery and getting them involved in that journey with you as a business has been a key aspect of achieving success here. So I wanted to start just a little bit with some thoughts from a guy called David McWilliams. He's an economist, a writer, a journalist. He is Irish, but I think even if you're not Irish, I think you still may find him interesting. So he talks a lot about a generational thing and about sustainability and the approach to climate change being a generational thing. He talks about, in the 18th century, business, big business, financiers, landlords, bankers, etc. They argued that capitalism couldn't survive without the abolition of slavery. And today, in the 21st century, many businesses, pressure groups, and so on, they would argue that without fossil fuels, sort of global trade and finance will not survive either. And what he would argue here is there is a generational shift occurring, and he talks about the generational moral shift that's occurring that makes this concept of burning fossil fuels for global trade and finance no longer acceptable, and that organizations that do not take account of the need to become sustainable and move away from the use of fossil fuels, that they will become pariahs in the world to come for the next generation of consumers that are out there. So he talks about, more than anything else, we're talking about a generational shift when we talk about sustainability and climate, and that when generation morals shift, and that's it, the game's over. They don't go back the way. They only go forward, because the young essentially always win. The young replace the old, and the morals of the young replace those of the old. So sort of from that perspective, this change in terms of sustainability and climate it's not a whim, it's not a passing fad. It's a generational shift that's occurring, and it's a moral shift that's occurring as well in there. And that's that we've started to see, and that will just grow and accelerate as we move forward here. And it's about planning how to deal with that, planning how to cope with that, and how to survive and thrive within that environment as well. Sorry, I just gonna skip the slide on me. So in terms of so how to cope with the change, again, I think there's a mindset change here for businesses, and managing that proactively is key to success. And I think the mindset change is very much about this being again, going back to that, this is a transformational issue. It is not going to, it's not a sort of a fad. It is something which is going to change the way that you've got to approach business and how you've got to approach your customers. And in particular, it's about being able to demonstrate to your customers that you are, it's not about sort of, I guess, not about greenwashing what you're doing. It's about having the ability to demonstrate to your customers that you are investing in sustainability, that you are moving with this change that's occurring today, and that you're adopting the concept of climate budgets out there. So budgets to invest in sustainability, as opposed to carbon budgets, which are more about continue to use non-sustainable energy sources and offset it in some fashion. So it's a change into that concept of investing in sustainability and demonstrating that change in mindset to your customer base. When it comes to logistics, supply chain, and getting into that sort of last mile of delivery as well, one of the key things that needs to be achieved in there is more so than ever is utilizing the resources that exist within that area of your business and managing them to an even higher level of efficiency and effectiveness in order to deliver your service offering. So no longer will it be acceptable to not have that sort of keen focus on efficiency, effectiveness, utilization of resource, and through that being able to demonstrate it, investment in sustainability. And obviously with sort of the resources in this area of supply chains becoming more and more expensive, and also with things like driver shortages and general labor shortages, making those resources even more limited and harder to access than in the past, then getting your planning of those resources and having that sort of crucial objective of being able to plan them in a optimal fashion in terms of delivering sustainability is a critical sort of outcome that you need to adopt and plan for in your business to both win and continue to win your customer mindset, and also to continue to survive profitably from a climate budget and a financial budget point of view as well. And that concept of climate budgets about investing in sustainability, the businesses need to set themselves targets for what they're going to achieve there, and then really put the ownership of those targets with the financial targets for a business as well. So have them owned at an executive and finance level in the same way as the financial budget for a business is. I think then as you move into this, so getting your customers on side, going back to the fact that it is a generational thing, it's increasingly and relentlessly, the next generations are going to be the consumers and customers for all our businesses as we move forward here, and they have a role to play in and are willing to play in enabling organizations that address sustainability and achieve a better care for the climate out there. And whether it's sort of a business to business or business to consumer, asking your customers to get to help and get them involved as part of this, I think is critical to success here. So by that, sort of if you're making deliveries to your customers, enabling them to see what is the impact of one choice of delivery versus another choice of delivery, either timing, mode of delivery, and so on, enabling them to see that in terms of what is the impact on sustainability, what is the environmental impact of one choice versus another for those organizations, be they a B2B or B2C, is key here to enable them to come on board and help you achieve those more sustainable deliveries, and yet meeting their expectations as well. So green label choices without greenwashing is really what we're talking about here. And as an incentive, there's certainly research out there that shows that green label choices that are real have probably twice as much impact on price incentives alone in terms of delivery. And I think demonstrating the investment that you're making in your climate budgets in terms of demonstrating how you are able to measure and able to provide to your customers that ability to help you with those more sustainable delivery choices, more sustainable delivery options in there is key to this as well, in terms of getting your customers on side in this journey. I think, like all changes, technology is changing out there today as well, and utilizing technology, I think, is going to be critical to helping organizations achieve sustainability, achieve more sustainable delivery, but also demonstrate that sustainable delivery as well. So measure against targets and demonstrate against those targets. I think on the plus side here, there is a lot of technology which is already mature and capable in this area of sort of advanced planning and scheduling. There's massive capabilities around optimization of supply chains, optimization of routes for final mile delivery. That is ever increasing in terms of abilities to have continuous optimization of those deliveries, taking account of sort of dynamic aspects such as traffic speeds and time of day, but also road networks and restricted areas. But then as we move forward into electric vehicles here, they're also capable of taking in there things such as the battery charge durations, battery range, impact of temperature on the range of a vehicle, and so on. And by utilizing the technology effectively, and by bringing your customer into that sort of journey and having them part of the decision-making process in there, enabling more sustainable choices, then you can achieve things like increasing your stop density there as well. So we've seen that certainly achieved by customers to significant, sort of 12% and more in terms of increasing stop density. Communicating with customers, so customer communications, again, a critical aspect in bringing the customer with you on that journey, involving them in terms of the supply chain, and in particular for the last mile in there, the order and the delivery life cycle, communicating interactively with them, keeping them informed, enabling any changes in their circumstances or timings to be accounted for, any changes in the deliveries being accounted for in real time in there, and keeping that communication a positive and informative value for your customer to help manage that sort of impact on climate and achieve sustainability, and helping eliminate things like unnecessary waiting, idling, and so on in there. Artificial intelligence and machine learning is definitely something which in this area of optimization is having a growing and increasing sort of positive impact in there. There's a vast amount of data in there that can be used to help increase accuracy, increase efficiency, and drive more sustainability into the delivery world. Things like service durations, transit times by individual driver, by individual vehicle types, territories, customers. These are areas where artificial intelligence and machine learning can drive even further improvements into that whole area of advanced planning and scheduling. So certainly using technology to help achieve sustainability and transition customers to sustainable delivery is, I think, going to be a key enabler for the future. Just looking at some of the figures that we've compiled from Descartes over the last year or so, over a year, sort of from applying those technologies across our business in all supply chains, there's been just over 500,000 tons of CO2 avoided. There are so almost 2 billion sheets of paper and over 700 million liters of fuel that weren't spent. So certainly from setting targets, being able to measure those targets and being able to demonstrate achievement of a climate budget for your business it will be a key sort of enabler to helping you transition your customers to sort of a sustainable delivery. So that's really the topics I wanted to sort of touch on this morning. So Nick, I think if there's any questions, then happy to address them.
Yes. So one of the things would be how to identify deliveries that are green or could be green in order to label them appropriately and then obviously act upon the label.
Yeah. So I think it's a great question. Like the technology to do that definitely exists out there today, and many of our customers are using that. But it comes down to, if you think of the last mile deliveries, then once you have identified the delivery to an individual location for a customer, then as you're starting to build further commitments to your customers on top of that, you can start to assess relative to deliveries I'm already making, what is the incremental cost in terms of CO2 of adding a particular delivery in, and if I deliver to you at 11 o'clock next Friday, and then I'm looking to an option to deliver to a neighbour of yours, then trying to get them to recognise that if we deliver at midday or at 10 o'clock, then that is much more incrementally lower impact on the environment and much more sustainable than them pushing for a delivery to come back to you, I don't know, Friday evening at 5 p.m. So it's about enabling customers to see that relative cost and impact of the choices that they're making, and asking you as a business to commit to, and what that is doing to their impact as an individual customer on the environment and sustainability and an ability to achieve sustainability. So that is there today. It requires some intelligence within the solutions and a real world view of the world to achieve that. But yeah, that is certainly technology that's available today to achieve.
And I also wanted to bring a few things that you mentioned. Well, a few times you mentioned customer, and now bringing the customer and making them make the green delivery. Is this only presenting it at the checkout, for example? Hey, you can have this delivered maybe a bit more expensive, but in a greener way? Or are there any other ways where we can engage with them to make it better?
Yeah, so it's not just in terms of that sort of home delivery as well, even within the B2B world where you're doing regular deliveries to existing customers. Being able to provide to those customers in advance the impact of the timing of their deliveries and the types of deliveries that you're doing for them, and where potentially there is more sustainable options to make those deliveries, and allow them to have a lower footprint and lower impact on the environment, and add to their positively to their climate budget, is something that could be done in advance. It doesn't have to be at a point to checkout. Equally, for those sort of final mile home deliveries as part of an e-commerce sort of world, there is also the ability to inform people ahead of time that you are in their area, and that if you are looking to have a delivery of your groceries or whatever at the weekend, then the most efficient time for you to do that as a customer of ours would be whatever it may be, Saturday morning, Friday afternoon, and enable them to see in advance before they approach you as to where you can make that sustainable delivery, and help them invest in that sustainability as well. And in that way, look to bring them to you as a business which is investing in sustainability.
And should sustainable delivery be more expensive than the regular, usual delivery?
So there is no particular reason why it needs to be, and there's certainly a strong argument why it should in fact be cheaper, because sort of from a delivery point of view, if you as an organization are achieving a sustainable delivery, then you are using less resources, you're spending less energy in achieving that, and your customer in turn should be sort of by helping you achieve that, they should also be certainly gaining from that as well. So sustainable delivery it does not mean more expensive delivery. It's sort of it's maybe slightly counterintuitive that you're getting what you want, but you're not, you're getting it for less.
And another thing I also want to point, and people can see it in below at the moment as well, is you're joining us on the 24th of May in London in person for our networking and roundtable event. And we will be talking again on sustainability. And I wanted to look into what other things do you want to share with people at the in-person event?
Yeah, so I think in terms of in person, it's always good to sort of have conversations around how other people are seeing this. But certainly the topic of being able to get your customers involved in the end, sustainability is something that there's a community aspect and to sustainability, and being able to find those mechanisms to how do you get your customers involved in sustainability and enabling those climate budgets be profitable for them as an individual and profitable for the business as well. That concept is something which I think is emerging right now. Be good to understand people's feedback on that and talk a little bit more about that. And then also as we look at sort of the emergence and increase in what artificial intelligence is able to do in this space as well, those are probably areas that there's quite a bit more to cover on.
Well, people can register for the 24th of May in person in London in the description below. The link is in the description. We will be joined by Paul as well, and taking further that conversation on customer engagement and why is it important for logistics and delivery companies to do it and how to do it properly. We also have quite a lot of other things that we work with Descartes, so you can go on our website and find more information on all different topics, whether it is related to sustainability, fleet management, retail. Paul, thank you very much. And we will be
Thanks, Nick.
Moving on with now we will be moving on looking into another very important part of sustainability, which maybe on occasions gets a bit overlooked. Josh from Ecoveritas, just thank you very much. Now,
hi guys.
let me just
hi Nick.
Also bring your slides here, and well, the stage is yours, Josh. Thank you very much.
Brilliant, thank you, Nick.
Oh.
Corradi Remy, I'm commercial manager here at Ecoveritas. My role in the past has very much been in this world of producer responsibility. So I've been in this market for about just coming on 16 years. Majority of that time spent as a consultant in the area of packaging compliance, and these days looking at, I think as Paul was sort of alluding to, looking at ways we can perhaps use tech a little bit more effectively in what we do and around packaging data and that type of thing. My presentation today is going to be focused on extended producer responsibility. So this usually takes me over an hour, so I'm going to try and cram this into about 10, 15 minutes. So it'll be quite a lot of information I'm throwing at you. So please use the comments for questions, which I'm sure there'll be a few. I'll try and cover at least all the sort of significant takeaway points, I believe, for extended producer responsibility. So before I go into the nitty gritty, just a little bit more about Ecoveritas and who we are. So we're I guess a packaging data collection specialist. We specialize with producer responsibility, packaging compliance, and extended producer responsibility, and a lot of other packaging legislation that exists in the UK. Data is at the heart of it all. If you haven't got a good quality baseline set of data, then you're not really going to get very far with any of this. So what we do is we specialize in collecting data for our customers from their suppliers, verifying and quality checking that data and making sure it's fit for purpose. And then we use our expertise in the arena of producer responsibility and packaging compliance to complete the returns and the submissions for our customers, some of which you can see at the side there. And as I mentioned earlier, we're now looking using technology a bit more in what we do in collecting data, making suppliers' lives a lot easier, as it's not a pleasant process having to upload hundreds, if not thousands, of SKUs worth of packaging component data. So we're trying to make people's lives a little bit easier using tech and using that to our advantage and our customers' advantage. So in terms of EP, I think it's important to first look at what extended producer responsibility is all about, and exactly what that means. So extended producer responsibility is a way and a mechanism of making producers of a certain waste type responsible for it at its end of life. That's what it all boils down to. And whether that's, collections, making producers collect certain waste streams at their end of life, or making financial contributions to ensure that waste doesn't end up in landfill. It can be any of those types of mechanisms. Extended producer responsibility in the context of the UK usually revolves around financial contributions to the recycling infrastructure to ensure that recycling rates are increasing every year. And as part of that, in the UK, we've had legislation around extended producer responsibility, producer responsibility as it's known at the moment, since the 90s. So we've had packaging waste regulations since the 90s, and then we also have producer responsibility regulations around waste electricals and battery regulations as well. So there's a few different forms. I'll be focusing very much on packaging today. This is all about packaging compliance, because that's sort of the big change that we've got coming up this year, going from an old system that we've had since the 90s through to this new extended producer responsibility system that's going to be kicking off later this year. So extended producer responsibility reform comes as a package with some other regulations. I just wanted to touch on these quickly. I'm not going to go into these in any sort of detail, but I think it's just important to acknowledge that they do exist as well. So apart from extended producer responsibility, this year and in the future, we'll have other regulations coming in. Plastic tax, which I think is the presentation after mine, has already been enforced since last year, and it is ongoing. So I'm sure there'll be a great level of detail in the next presentation on that. We have deposit return systems coming in around the UK. Scotland has now been pushed to next year. That's all about the collection of drinks containers and paying a deposit, and then you claim that the consumer claims that deposit back at its end of life. So yeah, Scotland was going to be this year, but moved to next year, and the rest of the UK will follow thereafter. And then we also have on the horizon consistent collection regulations, where all local authorities in the UK and businesses will be required to collect and segregate waste in the same streams to make everything a little bit more consistent. I think especially in England, local authorities are quite different in the waste streams that they collect. So where I live in Warwickshire is probably completely different to where everyone else lives in terms of the material split and the different types of waste that are collected. So they're going to be streamlining and standardising those collections in future as well. So a little bit. Now I'm going to focus on extended producer responsibility, because that's the sort of the main thing that I want to go into. That's the one that's close to us on the horizon this year. So to put into context where we're at the moment. So as I mentioned before, we've had packaging compliance in the UK since the 90s. 1997 is when those regulations came in. And then over the last 20 or so years, there's been very little change in those regulations. I would say I've been in the market for about 16 years, and I haven't really experienced any sort of changes at all. So now we're on the cusp of this huge change, because the old regulations, although they have, we've seen recycling numbers increase over the last 20 years, and there has been increase in the recycling infrastructure in the UK. Some could argue, and this is maybe controversial, that the current system is more about keeping the cost low for businesses rather than focusing on sustainability and the diversion of packaging waste away from landfill at its very core. So now these extended producer responsibilities will kind of flip the script, and now it won't be more about keeping the cost down for UK businesses. It will be about creating a more sustainable and green infrastructure for packaging waste. And these sort of points encompass what extended producer responsibility is all going to be about going forward. So encouraging a circular economy, so making sure that we have a circular approach to packaging waste, and the money being contributed by producers encourages that circular economy. There'll be a single point of compliance at the moment I'll go into this a little bit more detail in one of the next slides. At the moment, the obligation of these regulations is split between the supply chain. Going forward, it will be one producer that picks up the entire obligation for packaging, depending on where they sit. So I'll go into that in a bit more detail in a second. The full net cost of recovery will be covered. At the moment, the financing system under the current regulations only requires producers to pay for the reprocessing of material. So that's a very small part of the full net cost of recycling in the UK. So things like local authority collections, like street bin litter, that type of thing is not currently covered in the current system, where that obviously plays a huge role in packaging's life cycle, particularly when it reaches its end of life. So that will now be considered within the actual cost that producers are required to pay going forward. Eco-modulation of fees will be something that comes in a little bit later. It isn't coming in this year, will be coming in 2025, but that's an incentive system to look at incentivizing the use of more recyclable packaging. So recyclable packaging will incur a lower compliance cost than non-recyclable packaging, which will incur a cost penalty. So it's a way of making producers think about their material choices and making their packaging more recyclable. There'll be new data reporting requirements. So at the moment, producers are required to submit a report once a year annually to the Environment Agency, which is based on the previous calendar year's activity and sales volumes. Going forward, that could potentially be as many as 3 different reports that are required to be submitted to the Environment Agency. So quite a big reporting change, and the data points will be changing for that as well. And then in 2026, there'll be some mandatory labelling requirements on all packaging, primary packaging items, which I will go into in a few slides' time. So quite a few changes coming up with extended producer responsibility. So I just wanted to touch, I did touch on this a little bit in the previous slide, but just sort of to give you a bit of context and a picture around the full net cost of recycling, because one of the big changes from the current regulations to extended producer responsibility is going to be this full net cost of recycling, and businesses and producers' costs are going to increase quite significantly due to this. So as I mentioned, the current system works, the current financing system uses this thing called the PRN system. So the PRN stands for Packaging Waste Recovery Note. And those packaging waste recovery notes are generated by accredited reprocessors. So reprocessors will collect and recycle material. They'll generate a certificate of evidence, which is the PRN, that will say we recycled X amount of paper. And then producers that are obligated by the current regulations will have to procure enough recycling evidence to offset their obligation effectively. So they're offsetting their packaging obligation with PRNs, and that covers investment into the reprocessing side of things. So reprocessors use that money generated by the PRN system to invest in the recycling infrastructure. Now, that's, as you can see, it's just a small part of the complete full net cost of recycling. We have all these other things that require investment as well. So that's what this extended producer responsibility will require producers to contribute into all of these different elements. And to give some sort of perspective on what that means for UK businesses in terms of money, the current packaging compliance system generated last year approximately 500 million in terms of financial contributions from registered producers, which there are about 7,000 odd producers, I believe, for packaging compliance. This will now move to, under EPR, it will move to a contribution of 1.7 billion by registered producers. So that's quite a significant shift in terms of the financial contributions by producers, going up from 500 million to 1.7 billion. So that's just something to think about in terms of the potential cost increases as part of extended producer responsibility. I did hear something about one particular grocery retailer where their bill they predict will be around 300 million just themselves for EPR going forward. So one business is nearly making up the entire sort of current market for packaging compliance under EPR. So it sort of puts it, gives it some perspective about where the costs will be going in terms of extended producer responsibility. So first, apart from the full net cost of recycling, that's kind of the first key takeaway that I'd like people to think about in terms of the cost increases that extended producer responsibility might bring. The second is the point of compliance. So the point of compliance under the current regulations splits the obligation through the supply chain. So depending on where you sit within that supply chain will determine your obligation in terms of your tonnage of packaging that you're liable to buy PRNs for. So it's split between raw material manufacturers, which are people collecting the raw material to make packaging. Then you've got converters, which convert raw material into a recognizable item of packaging. Then you've got packer fillers, which add packaging to a product or add empty packaging. So this covers all layers, primary, secondary, and transit. So if you're adding shrink wrap to a pallet, for example, you're adding an outer carton to some consumer packs, that would count as pack filling. And then you've got selling, and selling means supplying to an end user. So that means if your direct customer removes packaging, then that would be an obligation for you. You'd have to pick up a selling obligation if your customers remove it. That's moving to a single point of compliance. So if you do one of these things, you will no longer take a small percentage of the packaging you put onto the market. You will be picking up 100% of that obligation. So that is brand owner. If you've got an obvious brand on the packaging, then that would be your responsibility. If you import packaging directly to the UK, that would be your responsibility. If you're an online marketplace, so if you're providing a platform for consumers to sell to each other online, you may have an obligation there. Packer filler is where there's no obvious brand owner and you're adding unmarked packaging to your products. Again, primary and secondary transit levels. Then you've got distributors which supply empty packaging. And then there's another one which is seller, which is supplying packaging, again, to end users, to consumers that are going to remove that. Some of them have different cost responsibilities, which I'll go into in a second. So this is what obligates you as a producer, or obligates you for the regulation. So you have large, small, and seller. So large producer is someone that turns over 2 million and handles more than 50 tons of packaging. You have a small producer that turns over 1 million, or between 1 and 2 million, and handles 25 to 50 tons of packaging. Then you have a seller, which is 1 million pound turnover, or 25 tons or over. So as you can see, the large producers have quite a few responsibilities in terms of they have to report six monthly, and they have to pay all the full net cost of recycling. Small producers have one annual report, and they just pay the scheme administrator fees, which is based on household packaging. I'll touch on that in a second. Then you have sellers, which all they have is reporting responsibility. So if your only obligation is as a seller and selling directly to consumers or people that are going to remove the packaging, then you only have to report data. You don't actually have any cost responsibility there. So the other important distinction is household and non-household packaging. So the easy way to look at this is household packaging will attract more cost. Non-household will have a lower cost in these regulations. Household packaging is basically primary and shipment packaging. So basically consumer packs or mail order packaging. Non-household are things like secondary and transit. The reason these two are split and why they have a cost difference is because household packaging will obviously go into our bins at home, and local authorities will collect that packaging. So producers of household packaging will be required to contribute to the local authority collection mechanisms. Non-household packaging will be discarded of in a commercial environment, and therefore businesses will be paying for the disposal. So it will just be the reprocessing fees that non-household packaging will acquire. So it's quite an important distinction within these regulations, that you have to identify household and non-household packaging. It's quite an important thing to do. Not as clear cut as primary, shipment, secondary and transit. There might be a bit more to it, but in essence, try and think of what would end up in a household and what would end up in a commercial waste stream. There are a few more data points that we need to consider. So things like public bin litter, drinks containers, reusable, will all need to be split out within submissions. Everything will need to be identified at their packaging level, so primary, secondary, shipment and transit, which helps with the household, non-household distinction. The data will be declared by material, so you can see the materials there. It's quite straightforward at the moment. We think the data will become a lot more granular in 2025 once the eco-modulated fees are introduced, and then obviously identifying where you sit in terms of a producer type. Are you the brand owner, packer, filler, importer, etc.? that packaging. The other thing I wanted to bring up is the labelling. So labelling will become mandatory from 2026 on all packaging apart from flexibles and films, and then in 2027 on the films and flexibles as well. So the recycling logo will be a recycle, do not recycle logo, the recycle now logo, which is there. That'll have to be on every packaging component come 2026. I think this is something that's important for businesses to realise that this is coming. Something to look into. I believe the on-pack recycling label OPRL can assist with this if there's any questions, and Eco Veritas can do the same. But just something to be important to be aware of that comes with this extended producer responsibility. It's not all about reporting data to the Environment Agency. There is a recycling labelling requirement coming down the line. So really important that businesses start to look at this now in preparation for 2026, because I can appreciate changing labelling and adding labels to packaging is not that straightforward in supply chain. So just something extra to consider. Now, I was going to go through our support if I had some extra time. I don't think I do have any extra time, so I'll leave that for now. I'll allow some time for questions.
Thank you very much. One of the things that you mentioned was the offsetting. You mentioned the word offsetting, which I think that many people feel that it's a bit of a cheating the system. Now, one of the questions here was the Advertising Standards Authority announced the crackdown on the offsetting and labeling things as carbon neutral and net zero when in practice they are not necessarily that. So does this impact what you talked about, and just in general your opinion on that?
Yeah, this is not something I have any experience with, unfortunately. Carbon neutral and net zero is kind of outside of the extended producer responsibility realm. I think this comes into more of a greenwashing territory. And if I had to give my personal opinion on this, I would say that's a great thing if they're cracking down on people providing false information and falsely categorizing that then they're net zero or doing anything positively to the environment when they're actually not. I'd say any sort of crackdown on that type of thing is very welcome, and probably should have been done a long time ago. So unfortunately, I can't give any professional comment on that because I don't have any experience in that area. But that's my personal opinion, obviously.
And one last thing, I also wanted to look into the financial side of things. You mentioned the retailer who calculated millions of additional cost. Do you think that there will be enough organizations who can afford this change? And is it going to lead to...
It's a good question. It's a good question. It's certainly for some businesses, particularly brand owners and importers, I would say, are going to bear the brunt of this cost. And for them, an operating cost of probably, a couple of $100,000 at the moment is suddenly going to be tens of millions of pounds. It's definitely something that needs to be budgeted and needs to be considered. I think the problem at the moment is, and something I didn't really get around to talking about, is that we don't know what the fees are going to be at the moment. So the reporting starts this year from October, and the first sort of invoicing round under extended producer responsibility regulations will be April 2024. So that's when producers will start to have to pay for extended producer responsibility compliance. And at the moment, we don't have any costs provided by DEFRA or any NGOs or governing bodies about what these fees are going to be. So at the moment, there's one thing I always say is it's horrible when you get higher costs come in. Yeah, that's terrible. But it's even worse when you can't budget for them. So at the moment, businesses aren't able to budget for this, which I think is more of the issue. There's nothing companies can do to kind of forecast this accurately. So yeah, at the moment, it's kind of hard to tell. All we can do is predict. Well, they're saying that it's 6 to 20 times cost increase on your current packaging compliance bill is what they're looking at, and that's quite a big range difference. So yeah, we're all waiting with bated breath on DEFRA and the government to release some more accurate cost information on EPR.
Josh, thank you very much. And
You're
people
welcome.
will be able to learn a bit more about extended producer responsibility and other things. We also work with EcoVeritas, again, on our website, but after the event as well, we'll send a bit more information. Thank you. And we are switching gear in a different side of sustainability, but this time with Mike Best from British Land. And let me just also, Mike, bring your slides here. Now, yeah. Well, Mike, thank you very much. And it's your turn.
Thanks, Nick. Good morning, everybody. My name is Mike Best, and I'm Head of Logistics at British Land. British Land, for those of you who don't know us, we are a property investment and development company. We're FTSE 100 listed, and we're a diversified REIT, so a real estate investment trust. And diversified means that we invest in lots of different types of real estate. Office, retail, and logistics are our primary focus. So today I'm going to talk to you about logistics, our focus, and particularly the challenges with London, and then talk you through a case study of how we think we can help to deliver a more sustainable supply chain. So like I said, British Land invests across various sectors of real estate, and our focus in logistics is London. This is because there's strong occupier demand. London generates a huge amount of demand for deliveries, but it's also a very challenging market to service, especially with its high congestion. There's limited supply because of the other competing uses for real estate in the capital, particularly housing. And also it's very complicated to build and develop new spaces in central London because of the difficulties with actually bringing the materials into the most central locations, but also the planning regime. So like I said, we invest across different asset classes and have a lot of experience in developing very complex buildings right in the center of the capital. We're able to put logistics alongside our other investment classes. And also we've now developed a large development pipeline of logistics opportunities within the M25 and Zone 1. And that's where I want to focus today, on the most central locations. So to support our investment thesis, we commissioned some work by Centre for London and UCL, looking into the benefits of low carbon freight in the very central locations. UCL conducted a peer review of research that had already been done in this sector, and then took that and, using quantitative filters, assessed where the best locations for logistics in the capital would be. We also got Centre for London to interview a range of different stakeholders, occupiers, planners and local authorities, to understand their views on the sector and how that aligned with the data that UCL had produced as part of their report. And these reports are available on our website, so you can go on there and download them and read them at your own time. I mean, the key conclusions from this, I've put on the slide, but just to talk through them, first of all, it's sustainability. So by delivering hubs in the very center of London, we can switch that last mile mode of transport away from diesel-powered vans to electrified vehicles, and particularly to cargo bikes, and reduce emissions by up to 90% per parcel. If we use bikes in the most central locations, they're also much quicker. In fact, PedalMe, who is a cargo bike distributor, they estimate that their cargo bikes are 1.6 times faster in London than delivering by van. And this brings reliability and cost benefits to both the occupier and the consumer. And we're also able to reduce the mileage traveled, again, helping with the sustainability of deliveries, but also taking out some of the cost of those deliveries by reducing the total mileage covered. So our portfolio is very concentrated in London, and we split London into two zones. Outer London, so approximately Zone 3 to the M25, and then inner London. And you can see here, we've got a few locations marked in blue, which are where our logistics sites are. And then in red, we've got other assets that British Land own, different asset classes, demonstrating our experience within the capital. And so I wanted to talk through a case study. And so the one that I wanted to pick is at Paddington. So 2 weeks ago, we got planning permission for this facility. It's located at Paddington, right by Paddington Station. And this is a former Crossrail work site that is located underneath some office buildings that we own. So again, as a diversified REIT, in those very central locations, there's very limited opportunity for pure logistics. And here we're able to pair logistics with office and retail above. Like I said, we've got the planning permission now, and we're envisaging inbound delivery by the largest vehicles. So you have the ability here to bring in deliveries using HGVs. Again, looking to move product in bulk and help support occupiers' costs, but also outbound deliveries by the smallest and low carbon vehicles, which could remove up to 100 large vans from Westminster's Road and provide emissions equivalent to planting Hyde Park's trees 3 times over. So this space, not only will it be delivered in a sustainable way by us as a real estate developer, but we're really looking beyond just the physical real estate and the environmental savings that we can help facilitate in the supply chain by delivering these most central locations. And so as part of this, we're also able to offer other ESG benefits. Like I said, we have an investment in the wider area through the office buildings above, and we have access to our other social and environmental programs that we operate in the area, which logistics occupiers will be able to take advantage of. And so I wanted to leave you with a location map here. So this is where we are. We're just north of Paddington Station. As you can see, we're in Zone 1, so very central and really good inbound access by both the A5 and the A40, and obviously a very dense delivery environment right outside of the hub in Westminster and surrounding areas. So this is what we envisage the hub will look like. As you can see here, it sits below the office buildings right next to the mainline rail station. And this is something we're really excited about, trying to change the way products are delivered in central London and make them more sustainable. And it's something we're looking forward to bringing forward later this year. And so given the limited time, I'll probably stop there and ask Nick if there are any questions.
Yes, there are a few things that I wanted to talk about as well. Is there, when we're talking about sustainability in general and in construction and in deliveries and hubs like that, is there the perfect real estate location or type which can tick all these boxes and make us really green?
So this was part of the research that we did with UCL. And so UCL looked at a number of different quantitative factors that would optimize what we believe will be the locations for those deliveries. Principally, it's driven by excellent inbound access, so that we're not disrupting the supply chain and creating points of double handling, but also proximity to a very dense delivery area to maximize the efficiency of those last mile vehicles. So like I said, you can go onto our website and download the report and look through the full list of filters. But some of the other things that we've included are things like cycling infrastructure, so that we can help transition to cargo bikes, congestion data, and then also population and business data to really focus in on those high drop density areas.
And how far in advance should you look into these areas? You mentioned Crossrail and that it was a former Crossrail site, which presumably meant that the plan took a little while to become reality. So how far in advance do you have to engage with local authorities and you as a company in order to secure and get this?
Yeah, so I mean, again, in these very central locations, there's limited opportunities, mainly because of the competing pressure from offices and from residential. So once you've secured a site, which is probably the hardest step, actually engaging with the local authority can take a considerable amount of time. Officially, the planning process is sort of 3 months, but by the time you do all the early engagement and all of the reports, it can take up to a year to get planning.
And you mentioned also the early engagement, and another thing that we spoke about earlier with Paul from the CART was around engagement with consumers and the wider community. I assume that for such a project, this is really important. How do you do it?
Absolutely. So we proactively engaged with the residents around Paddington, explained to them what we were looking to do and the benefits that it would bring. And I think that going back to sort of referencing Paul's presentation earlier, everybody was really supportive of moving to those sustainable deliveries, both from an air quality and a carbon perspective, but also taking those vans off the road and in helping improve congestion and tidy up the street scene.
Mm-hmm. And finally, people again can see below, you will be also part of our in-person event on the 24th of May. Can you just give us a bit of an idea of how would you like to move the conversation forward?
So I think that, like I said, real estate has a very long lead in to actually developing these spaces. And so what we're trying to do is look at how we can support occupiers on their journey to sustainable networks. So I think that we will deliver best in class sustainable buildings, but it's really looking beyond that at the real estate impact in the supply chain. And so I think, what we really like to do is engage with occupiers and, understand their desires far enough in advance to make sure we're delivering product that is suitable for their operations.
Mike, thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Nick.
We will be continuing now with bringing Steve from the camera turned on. Steve from Go Plastic Pallets, talking about plastic as not the enemy, but something that actually can help us in the sustainability goals that we all have. Steve, thank you very much. And then
Thank you, Nick.
The stage is yours.
Good morning. So I'm Steve Penny. I'm Key Accounts Manager with GoPlasticPallets.com. I'm going to talk a little bit about plastics packaging tax and a little bit about RTP, returnable transit packaging, and how we believe these two things can come together and hopefully make the supply chains that we're all working in a little greener. So you see my headline there, plastic is not the enemy, Prime Minister. Quite a bold statement, quite an interesting one. We possibly have a few more enemies, but plastic we don't feel is one of them. So I just want to talk a little bit about the plastics packaging tax. For those of you who are not aware, it was introduced in April 2022, and PPT applies to the plastic packaging manufactured in or imported into the UK that does not contain at least 30% recycled plastic. Obviously, when the tax was there on the horizon as a business, we were trying to understand this, and we saw the tax as being something that would come into place and would help, was designed to drive down the use of single-use plastics. So water bottles, food packaging, shrink wrap, etc., etc. Great intentions at the start. We all agree that we need to promote a greener world, and that was one way of the government saw fit to try and achieve that. But I think it's fair to say that the lack of consistency in some of the decision-making process has caused some problems. As a business, when we started to look into this, we looked at the products we sold and we understood that perhaps our products would be exempt from this. So if we take an example of a virgin plastic pallet, a virgin grade plastic pallet that we would supply into a business such as a food manufacturer or a pharmaceutical processor, that has a very long life. The long life of that product, the life expectancy, is probably about 10 to 15 years. And during that time, that particular product is going to do many cycles through the supply chain. However, when we delved a little further into this, HMRC told us that no, that would be subject to the packaging tax. So that would obviously affect and impact us as a business and would also affect our customers using and purchasing those type of products from us. So the only way we could challenge that was a costly fight in the High Court, which we didn't really want to get too involved in. So we looked at how we would develop this. So if we look at the forecast that HMRC had, they forecasted that 20,000 companies would need to sign up and be involved in this tax in year one. And when we looked at an FOI, a Freedom of Information Act, and HMRC came back to us, we found out that only 3,426 had actually signed up for that scheme at that point. Why was that? There was probably a number of reasons, a lack of awareness or desire. When you started to read the regulations, it was quite complex in terms of what would be included and what wouldn't be included in the scope of these. So there was a lack of uptake on that. And we consider that to be maybe a little bit of a problem in this situation. And our FOI request showed that HMRC will comfortably exceed their 300 million tax take in the first year, despite the lack of businesses that are registered on this scheme to date. And in our view, we kind of look at it and we think it's a good intention. It was well intentioned, but we're not quite sure where this tax should go and maybe it's not been framed and structured possibly in the right way. As a business, just to be completely transparent, Go Plastic Pallets is registered and involved in the scheme. In the first 3 quarters of that scheme, we paid over £146,000 of tax. Our tax bill for the end of the first year will probably be in excess of £200,000. So as a business, we're looking at that and we're thinking maybe some reform is required here. I want to talk now a little bit about returnable transit packaging, RTP, and where that sits in terms of the benefits that this can provide in creating sustainable supply chains. So RTP, returnable transit packaging, essentially is a plastic pallet or a plastic container. Now it can be various different sizes. But RTP is primarily focused, and the use of it is preventing waste and optimizing an asset through many cycles. Repair and reuse can also form part of that equation. So just to come back to my original example, a plastic pallet made of a virgin grade polymer, or in fact a recycled polymer, in a fast-moving automated distribution centre could be used many, many times with little change in its performance. It's not uncommon to see 250 to 300 cycles in the whole life of that particular product. Just on the left of the slides there, you'll see the waste hierarchy concept, which many of you will be familiar with. It's been around for over 40 years, and it's still very valid in evaluating the best ways to handle waste, protecting people and the environment. And obviously in that hierarchy concept, reuse is placed very highly in that concept. So best to worst, you can see them on the left-hand side, but the key ones are that as a business and as a provider of this type of product, the key ones we're interested in are reduce, reuse, and recycle. We're a big advocate of the cradle-to-cradle methodology. And what do I mean by that? Basically, in that sense, we can take a plastic pallet, we can make a pallet, so we can use polymer to make that pallet. We can use polypropylene, high-density polyethylene. That's the core material of what these products are made from. We're going to use it through as many cycles as possible. At the end of its useful working life, we're going to collect it and we're going to recycle it. And we're going to make that into another pallet. Now, if we can't make that into another pallet, we'll maybe make it into a pallet of a lower specification or a container of a lower specification. Or we might even make it into something completely different. We might make it into a park bench or a piece of street furniture. So we have ways of sustaining that and invoking that circularity of this valuable asset, which is called plastic, which we all use in our day-to-day lives. Just a sort of little example of that in terms of reduce. Back in 2018, the Fraunhofer Institute in Germany made a study of plastic crates versus cardboard containers when transporting 1,000 tons of fruit through the supply chain. They calculated all the emissions and they looked at how those might be reduced. So as you can see on the slide there, plastic in that scenario would have created 15 tons of CO2 emission. Cardboard would have created, in their calculations, 37 tons of CO2. So the plastic was 60% lower in terms of the emissions it created in that supply chain. And in terms of the reuse of those particular products, the plastic was able to be reused over and over again. The cardboard in that supply chain, probably a lot of those cardboard boxes would only actually ever have been used once, because maybe they got torn or they got wet, or at the point of collection, maybe they got discarded. Maybe they got put into landfill because someone didn't realize that a circular approach to this, the reuse, was actually particularly valid for that particular product. So we can see we can tap into the waste hierarchy and we can try and produce greener supply chains through the reuse and sustainability and the correct use of materials. I think it's interesting to say, because if we look ahead as to about what RTP can provide, I think someone said there's no such thing as the wrong material. It's the incorrect use of material in the wrong way. And just want to sort of pick up on those some of those messages there. So we all know that we live in a very consumption-based environment. Convenience is very, very paramount to all of us in our daily lives. And as a technology has kind of accelerated that process, we all like to go on the internet and we like to order stuff today that we know we're going to get tomorrow. So this whole point about reduce, reuse, and recycle, if I can just bring that back to the whole concept of, for us, which is keeping plastic where it belongs, which is reusing it and recycling it. So if we look at reduce as an example, so how can we reduce? So we can reduce as a business and with our manufacturing partners, we can reduce the use of 100% plastic virgin grade material. We don't necessarily need to do that. We can use recycled materials. Currently, 93% of the plastic pallets that we supply are made from 100% recycled materials. So there's a very good and tangible example of how we do that. In terms of other reduction, we can reduce the weight of the packaging of the RTP. So if we take a plastic pallet and we reduce the weight in it through good design methodology, the actual person who puts that on their transport trailer, on their truck, to transport that from A to B, is actually going to have a pallet of a lesser weight. So that's probably going to reduce their fuel consumption and probably reduce their CO2 emissions. Reuse. So to create the reuse angle, we need to have well-designed, well-specified and well-manufactured products. We need to do that because we're trying to obtain these multiple cycles through the life of the asset we're talking about, be that a plastic pallet or a plastic container. And recycling. So at the end of the useful working life of that product, we are going to take that product back and we are going to recycle it. So we're going to put it through a process where we granulate it, we make it from a whole pallet into some smaller granulated plastic, and then we might compound it into pellets so we can actually re-inject that into another container. And at that point, we may need to provide some incentive to do that. This material has some value, the residual value. We will collect the pallets, we will recycle it with our manufacturer partners based in Belgium, and we will actually provide back some residual value to the owner of that asset. And we know that incentivization can work. If we look at a consumer scenario, 95% of plastic bottles in Germany are recycled due to a deposit return scheme. This was back in the old days when the Corona van used to come round and used to buy your popping glass bottles. You would pay the deposit in advance. When you return the empty glass bottle, you would get your deposit back. So we wonder whether that could be adopted in a wider sense at B2B level. And finally, I'd just like to talk a little bit about what Plastic Pallets and Go Plastic Pallets does on a daily basis. So in 2019, since 2019, when we launched our recycling scheme, we've recycled over 1,000 tons of plastic pallets and boxes. And we collect those from all sorts of businesses. We do a lot of visits in sites where we go into food processors, pharmaceutical companies, where there literally is a lot of plastic waste sat either in their DCs or in their yards. And it's either filling up with water or gathering dust. And it's purely because those products are no longer needed in their process. So what we offer to do is we offer to collect those, we send them to our recycling partner, and as we say, we are completing that cradle to cradle methodology, creating circularity by taking that material and properly recycling it. And since that time when we started in 2019, we've recycled the equivalent of probably close to 48,000 pallets. And you can see from the slides there, if we stack those pallets one on top of the other, that would create a massive pile of pallets over 7,500 meters high. And just to put it into some context there, in terms of how that would stack up against some of the world's tallest buildings, the Burj Khalifa, the Eiffel Tower, and dear old Big Ben. So that really, from us, is how we try and create these sustainable and these greener supply chains through the use of an asset which is used through many, many cycles.
And thank you very much. And just I want to bring a question here on, are USA plastic pallets made from a different material? And we get their shipped goods sent to the UK to save weight on shipping. And then the follow-up was, they're simply just not robust, the get is broken, and we end up with bits all over the warehouse. So do you have any suggestions on this particular one?
Okay, that's a really interesting question, because the answer is they're probably not made of any particularly different material. They're probably a polypropylene or a high density polyethylene. That's something we could probably assist you with. It would tap into the way that we are working, because at that point, what's your alternative? You have this plastic waste in your business that you don't need, you don't want. So to recycle it and create that sustainability, that circularity, it's possible that that material could be made back into some more pallets. They might not be the pallets that you use as a business, but they would be involved in putting, definitely put that back into someone else's pallets. So that would be really interesting. I'd be happy to pick up on that.
And also something we looked into with Josh, whenever it comes to new tax, whatever it might be, and we talk about, this is going to be the end of the business. Do you think that there is a possibility that some businesses will just not be able to cope, not just financially, but also because of the administration needed with all of any new tax that comes in?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think the tax is quite complex. And there was a quote in one of the slides there from Jim Hardestad, said that really we want to get all the stakeholders in one place and create a tax which doesn't penalise eco-conscious businesses, because this is in all our interest to create these sustainable supply chains. So we see this as a kind of development to move forward on this. There are some costs, as I said earlier on, also the reduction of the use of virgin grade plastics, that lowers the cost for people, and using recycled material is perfectly sustainable and acceptable for a lot of the specification of pallets we're trying to create, where pallet needs to work in automation, so it needs to be very consistent, very structural. But there are definitely ways that packaging tax, in our opinion, could be framed and structured in a better way for probably everyone to. And I think incentivization about this, how do we sustain this? How do we sustain cradle to cradle? How do we actually achieve that? How do we get people to buy into that? So we're very open to a conversation about it. It's a tax with good intentions, but maybe it just doesn't sit in the right framework.
Well, Steve, thank you very much. People can learn a bit more, not just with your presentation, but also the topic from Go Plastic Pallets, other things we worked on our website.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Now, we will be moving with the conversation we had with FourKites and Trax on achieving your ESG goals in a true and sustainable fashion. Looking specifically at ESG and how we can turn it into a more operational and really successful part of the whole company operations. I'm joined by Todd Sims, who is from FourKites, and Steve Bede, who is from Trax. And Todd, Steve, thank you very much for joining me. And I would like to, probably the first question we'll go with Todd is, how should we understand ESG? There seems to be this look that it's something very strategic, but can we actually turn it into something more operational?
No. I think it's a great question to start with, for sure. I also feel like, specifically within supply chain, I'm a former practitioner myself, but the big push around ESG, obviously it took off, 2-3 years ago, and that's all you heard about. Executive compensations tied to ESG performance, and huge push, big numbers that were set out there. And I feel like we're at a new fork in the road where a lot of folks have taken pause to say, okay, well, hold on, we really got to feel what's realistic here and what's not, so we can report back out, and not necessarily to the street, but also to the commitment of our employees. Like, where are we headed as an organization? So I think operationally, really making very easy is the wrong word, I think tangible goals to achieve, that provides a level of continuity and sustainability within your sustainability goals, right? And I think that change is taking place right now. In the beginning, there was a lot of goals around, okay, we're focused on the Paris Treaty, so it's 2050. And I think that's too far in the future. It's what can we do now? And I'm a big believer. I'm not necessarily a big believer in the paper straw, if you will, saying that that's the focus, but more what can we do in a supply chain around efficiency, standardization, and how can technology enable us? That alone provides a level of focus operationally that I think you can achieve some of those goals. And I think you're seeing a lot of organizations make significant strides there, where the balance does become, how do we maintain these operational goals and still be a profitable company for the long term? And I think that was always the rub. How do we do this in the right way, right? We can't do 30-40% of our private fleets, as an example, on EV, just because the cost structure is just not there. The infrastructure is not there. So where are the areas that we can really attack? So I think, you're seeing this from an operational perspective of folks really not hiding, but finding, deeply discovering those opportunities operationally, more from an efficiency perspective. And it goes well beyond just, routes and lanes and stuff like that. It's the products we're delivering. When you see that come, I think the word that Ball Corporation uses a lot is design fully circular products. Is that an opportunity? So I think you're seeing that change take place, where the realities finally come into fruition for a lot of folks to go, how can we attack this on a consistent basis versus this arbitrary number that's many, many years down the road that it's really hard to see the impact we're making there.
And I'll bring Steve here from Trax. In one of the previous conversations, you mentioned the word data. And I think this is really connected to operations and becoming more practical and realistic. How much data do we need to have to make it real and possible as an ESG goal?
I think it's a great question. And I'll just kind of carry the conversation forward from where Todd left it. So I'm going to give some examples, but everything we do relates to having data fundamentally to make good decisions, okay? Tracking those decisions, being able to monitor. I remember many years ago, you were lucky if you knew if a carrier was part of, in the US, for instance, SmartWay, right, was an organization. So you gave maybe some credence to picking a carrier over another because of that. Today's world is more complex. So truly creating actionable data requires scope 1, 2, and 3 tracking and traceability. And specifically around scope 3, I think it's more difficult because you have third parties like asset carriers and LSPs as part of your overall supply chain. So getting consistent data for scope 3 is really challenging for companies. So fundamentally, you have to capture all that information and then you need to baseline it. Once you baseline it, it gives you the ability to know where I am. So it's always, what's my current state and where do I want to go with my target and goals that are realistic? I think one of the nice things, and Todd mentioned it as a balance, is there are really 3 things about the supply chain. There's cost to serve, there's service, and now there's sustainability. All 3 may not all be 100% aligned, but typically they are. So for instance, modal optimization, using the right asset carrier, using a carrier that produces less CO2 because they better manage their fleet, shipment consolidation, using, for instance, the right optimization of load, utilization of asset and things like that. They not only lower the cost to serve, but they also reduce carbon emissions. So I like to use the word cake and eat it too. I think it's realistic to say that you can balance these things and achieve multiple goals, not only reducing cost, maintaining service levels, but also reducing carbon emissions. And I think that Todd's comment about the fork in the road, we now have the data to support that. And to me, that's really operational utilization and the execution and strategy of the company in terms of supply chain logistics. So you got to have the data, though, to measure it. You have to have it to baseline it. You have to know what decisions you're making are truly reducing cost to serve, as well as maintaining service and lowering CO2 over the time frame and targets which you have set.
And a question, again, obviously for both, but how many mature organizations are out there that understand ESG as something which can lower the cost, but also increase profits eventually?
There's plenty of examples out there, and they're large, obviously, global organizations, your Unilevers of the world, Schneider Electrics, and there's obviously some high-tech organizations out there too that do really, really well with it. But to Steve's point, it is about the data, and a lot of organizations I would consider fall into 2 categories. You're either data rich or you're data obese, right? So you don't have the ability to consume and digest the data to make sense of it. And I would also say on that same point around data, it has to be in a real-time component, because the one thing about sustainability, it cannot be a hope in the sense of our goals are X and we're not going to look at it for 12 months, because, or even 3 months for that matter. You should be able to look at it month over month, maybe even week over week, to say, are we directionally doing what we said we were going to do? Why not? And you can even hold your suppliers accountable in that same manner, which I think is an excellent point that Steve made too. You know, the one thing I would just add to that piece is that we are seeing another transition take place within supply chain. When the chief sustainability officer role came out, sometimes it reported into the chief supply chain officer, sometimes the CEO. We are seeing that shift though. A lot of those responsibilities are reporting directly into supply chain, which I think is absolutely critical to make significant material impact to the bottom line on this piece.
Couldn't agree more, Todd. And again, scope 3, the hard one, right? It's all your carriers, your suppliers that aren't inside the four walls. Consistently measuring that is not easy. If you're not an early adopter of data management, decision support through systemic capture, frequent cadent usage of the data to make corrective actions, then if you're waiting for some sort of regulation to occur to mandate it, it's probably too late.
Yep, absolutely. And it's interesting because in supply chain, we're really good at coming up with new nomenclature, right? Agility, resiliency, those kind of things. The new word out there now is transparency. I think that one's going to stick because that transparency allows for both inbound and execution as well as outbound accountability. That's going to be the really interesting change. That level of accountability is going to be, you talk about from a profitability perspective to supplier relationships to talent resource, talent retention. It's all going to be intertwined there. The folks that are able to, again, adopt this data, consume it, digest it, and be transparent with it, those are the ones you're going to see winning in the turns in the sustainability journey for certain.
And one thing I also want to bring here is the uniqueness of the goals, and should each individual company in a way reinvent the wheel every single time they look into ESG, sustainability, traceability, visibility, and all of the things that you mentioned. How unique should our goals be? And is there a template or a framework that can fit everyone?
So everybody starts at a different place, first of all. And like we already talked about, being an early adopter of transparency, data collection, and good data analytics is key here. But in terms of the journey, that's why I talked about baselining. Everyone starts from a certain place. Where that place is determined on where your baseline is. To me, setting goals, there are long-term goals and there are short-term goals, maybe some medium-term goals in there as well. But the key is it has to be realistic. To me, knowing where your baseline is, knowing what opportunity exists, and again, I'm including cost to serve in here as well. I've worked with a lot of companies to lower cost to serve by 5%, let's say over a year-to-year basis, or 10%. Okay, how are you going to do that? Well, then you have to break it down into the levers you could pull to do that. Use different carriers, negotiate better pricing, et cetera, et cetera. ESG is the same way. You have to set realistic target goals, monitor those, maybe stair-step those as in smaller incremental achievements in the short term. As you get better at the data and looking at the data and understanding how to use the data, you could set more aggressive goals, ultimately targeting a long-term goal that reduces overall carbon output or CO2e, whatever you're measuring in terms of the ESG program, by X amount by a long-term date. But the key is, I think Todd said it in the beginning, you just can't set a long-term goal without realistic sort of measuring milestones to get there. That's the key to me. So, Todd?
Yeah, no, 1,000% agree. I mean, you've already talked about the idea of benchmarking your supply chain to understand your carbon emissions and your decarbonization strategy. Super critical. And there's no one size fits all. I mean, products you produce, suppliers that you have to use potentially. I mean, have you done nearshoring efforts? Maybe, maybe not. Where do you sit globally? There's a lot of things that go into the algorithm to really determine where you sit. I'm with Steve though. You've got to create measurable goals for a number of reasons, right? There's the external factor, because you could get called out for greenwashing, right? Like you said this, and then you had to buy carbon credits. I mean, it's not going to be far-fetched for people to be able to read your 10K and understand what you have or have not done. And then there's internally, right? At the end of the day, I believe all companies want to do the right thing, and they're just trying to find balance. And do we have a roadmap that supports where we're trying to go? So let's baseline, benchmark where we are, current state, understand desired state, and what's in between. And there's a digitization factor. There's all these other factors. And again, a lot of organizations, they're going to sit different in that maturity curve. And it's really going to determine how far they can go and how quick they can go.
And I also, before we, in a way, wrap up the conversation, but I wanted to look into examples of companies that you think have, if not achieved it really, are at least certainly on the right path. And as far as you can obviously share with us some projects that you think have shown how it can be done the right way. Todd?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've got a couple. I mean, we've had some case studies and publications out there specifically regarding a Cardinal Healthcare as an example, right? They had an 11-year corporate strategy around sustainability that they were going down, and they wanted to have that completed by 2030, right? So they really understood early the impact of sustainability, and they wanted to make it a strategic imperative, which they've done a very good job in. The other piece was, do they have accurate data around their emissions? So if today it's X and tomorrow it needs to be Y, we really need to understand the reductions we're making there. And we have a sustainability dashboard that they utilize, so they're able to see their routes and lanes and understand that footprint and those emissions that they're able to decrease. And I think that's just an excellent journey that they've been on, and it's going to continue for sure. So it's obviously part of their DNA, and I think that's why they've made some significant changes. The other two that I'll bring up, one is a local company here in Colorado, but Ball Corporation. I've always been fascinated with their model, right? The whole idea of designing fully circular products, the infinite recyclability of aluminum. I think one of their taglines is you could take a drink out of a soda can, and in 2 weeks later, you could potentially have that same soda can in a different soda. I love that idea of how that works. And you can really lean into the tangibility of that, right? It's very real. Another one is Bayer Crop Science. I mean, they have very, very aggressive goals. They understand the impact to the environment. Obviously, they're in the agriculture world. So the impact that they make, it's well beyond their organization. They're impacting their customers who are farmers. They're impacting their employees. And they've got very aggressive short-term goals that tie to long-term strategy. And I think they've done a really good job with that as well. Those would be the three that I would mention today.
And Steve, on your side?
Yeah, you know what's interesting, you mentioned some life science there. Our pharma customers are early adopters of these strategies. That's an interesting takeaway, by the way. But just some recent examples of this is we work with our customers on network optimization. We had mentioned a little bit about that's one of those have cake and eat it too, right? You want to keep the total distance on the network down to lower cost to serve, but also it obviously reduces CO2. The interesting fact is normally when we do these network optimization studies in supporting our customers, it's all about lowering cost to serve only or maintaining service. Now there's a third element. So what we're able to do now with the data is say, you not only can lower the cost to serve by moving some supply closer to the distribution, but also the carbon impact of making those same changes. And that they came to us and asked for this information. So again, I've been in consulting for years on these projects, and it's never been sort of a three measurements. It's always been two. Interesting. Now they're saying, oh, I want to know, because again, my stakeholders are asking, they're asking, can I reduce the cost? Can I maintain a service level that's reasonable for the supply chain to meet its requirements for our customers, especially in pharmaceuticals? But also, can I reduce, what's the impact of the carbon emissions on that same work? That has not been in the past sort of the third question asked, and it is now. And so it's very relevant, and it supports our conversation about really operationalizing the information and using it to support initiatives and having verifiable results that that the C-level, various management, and even stakeholders or stockholders or shareholders or customers could also appreciate in terms of supply chain optimization.
Yeah, I was just going to say real quick on that. We've talked so much about data, and all the companies we just mentioned, as far as where they are in their sustainability journey, have an ability to disseminate that data across all parts of the organization. mean, that has a different level of momentum. The snowball effect is there. And I think that's super interesting, as you mentioned, nearshoring and the whole network optimization. And what are we doing with that data? I mean, disseminating it, the ability to do that is so critical too.
Well, thank you very much both. For everyone watching, we will be continuing the conversations both with FourKites as well as Trax on not just on ESG, sustainability, but on many other things that FourKites and Trax work on. Steve, Todd, thank you very much. And we will continue shortly with more things on ESG. Thank you.
Thank you.
From Microsoft, and we're going to talk about supply chain trends, things that Microsoft is working in their supply chain, but also a very interesting look into where supply chains are going. Raghav, thank you very much for joining me, and I will be bringing your presentation on the screen in a second. And the stage is yours. Thank you very much.
Very nice. Thank you, Nick, for inviting me. And it's a great pleasure to speak to the broader ecosystem of supply chain professionals. Today, the topic I'll be covering is enabling an AI-powered, resilient, and sustainable supply chain. A lot of words there, but I'll distill it for you all. We'll talk more about the strategic issues facing supply chain, the need for a composable and extensible supply chain platform, and the role of AI in SCM. A brief about myself: I'm Raghav Jendiala. I work as a principal product leader for developing supply chain products at Microsoft. I've been in this role for about 10 months. Prior to Microsoft, I was at SAP for 18 years. And there I was primarily in the planning and analytical applications in supply chain, retail, finance, and so forth. So glad to be here. Glad to cover this session with you. So let's go to our session. We have about 70% of supply chain leaders have been constantly responding to disruptions since the beginning of 2019. So supply chain is a topic that presidents and every person nowadays talks about because every one of us have been affected. The pandemic only highlighted the underlying challenges that the manufacturers and retailers face and exposed the fragility of global supply chains. So that's where we are today to look at because enabling a resilient and sustainable supply chain is an enormous challenge, and it's on the mind for all of us. So if we look at what we are hearing from our own customers, the challenges are pretty common across multiple domains, multiple verticals. So first of all, the challenges arising from going from the pandemic to endemic. How do we now become a resilient supply chain so that we don't run into the same issues that we ran previously? There's an increasing pressure of reacting to climate change. There's predicted recessions. There's also geopolitical tensions. So there are all these macro factors that go into the supply chain, and how do we better prepare for that? And then there's also the traditional supply chain challenges, which have not gone away, which is the volatility in the consumer demand. How do we, there's a lot of inventory pressure. In some industries, there's very high inventory that they need to deplete. And then in a certain other industry, there's still high demand and they're having the inventory pressures. And the challenge of visibility across your supply chain has not gone away. So it has now moved from your traditional four walls of your supply chain to now your tier N, end-to-end multi-tier supply chain, going from all the way from your customers to your business partners and suppliers. Then you might have also heard about rising energy costs, workforce shortages, and also urgency towards operating more sustainability. So these are still the challenges that many enterprises still want, and it's on top of their agenda. But if you look at the current state of systems across the enterprise, we see that there's all these systems which are disconnected. So, for example, there are systems of engagement with your CRM, with your e-commerce application. There's system of execution with your ERPs, warehouse management systems, and so forth. System of plannings, where you do your S&OP. Then there's a system of, and then there's external trading partners, your suppliers, and so forth, and also the real-world signals. So it's always a challenge for customers to have one composable platform where all these can come together in order to help with the insights that they're looking for. And this is where Microsoft has focused on, this is where we focus on to make sure that all these systems we were able to have an composable, interoperable, and extensible ecosystem across these different systems with the connectivity and the data harmonization so that you can run your business, do more with less. And this is the promise of this intelligent data platform, to bring these different systems together to have that unified data fabric across all these applications. Supply chain doesn't run with one system. It has a multiple of systems that need to come together. We as a supply chain also focus on by bringing the Microsoft Supply Chain Platform. So what this platform has is the components like Microsoft also provides supply chain management system. There's your traditional cloud ERP, where you have inventory management, procurement, production, transportation management, inventory management, all these common warehouse management processes. And then on top, we have also now brought together something called a Microsoft Supply Chain Center. This is a surround application that works across your multiple ERPs, so it's ERP agnostic. And so you have things like both transactional and analytical workloads, which is, for example, your intelligent order management or your supply and demand insights, also having collaboration with your external suppliers with the supplier portal, and also the data and AI platform. And the most important thing I want to highlight is also this ISVs and partner solutions. So to be able to have this plug and play ecosystem with your partner solutions and your SI solutions is critical for many organizations. So instead of going more like a point-to-point solution, if you have this central command center hub, which uses the best of Microsoft technologies, which is the Azure, the AI, the Teams collaboration, the Power Platform, low-code, no-code agility, along with our applications and the composability, is where we differentiate. So I would like to take an example of this with how to solve a real-world disruption problem. All right. So I would like to show you a quick demo of this Microsoft Supply Chain Center, which brings together, like I said, both insights, analytics, and your transactional and order management systems, all in one place with both the first-party and the third-party applications, so that there's a single pane of a system where you can do all your operations. So where does this help? Today, one of the major challenges is still the supply chain disruptions, and how do I manage those? So we start off with news. So this is AI-powered news, which shows what's happening in your supply chain network. For example, we see that there's a truck fleet in the north area, which is hit by the cyber attack. Okay, and we want to see how we can, what's the impact of that. So we can click on this impacted partners and see that what are the orders that are impacted, what are the partners that are impacted, and also look at what are sort of a mitigation we would have to make sure that the POs that are out there are delivered on time, because we have we have our SLAs to meet. This is where the power of AI comes in to also provide you what are those sort of the high impact suggested strategies to mitigate this. So for example, it would be something like prioritize orders to large customer accounts. And you can click on the details and see that the system recommended approaches could help you come back, have your OTIF levels be on track. But it also comes with the high customer service level, also comes with a high cost as well, which is about $5,000 in my case. So which is okay for me. And then I would, as a supply chain manager, I would go ahead and activate this. Now, I can also look at the health of my supply chain by looking at my supply and demand insights. This is where it's bringing together large amounts of data across disparate systems into a simple, easy to use, intuitive user interface. So here I can see that my supply coverage is not going to my target that I've set. And if I go into details, we can see that a certain brand, which is Northwind Roasters, has a projected inventory shortage over the next few weeks. So what would I do? I could use the power of my collaboration, so using embedded teams, to see if my external supplier has enough production capacity to meet, to deliver this inventory that I need. So with click of buttons, I can directly talk to my external supplier, asking if they can have the enough production to meet the shortage that we are facing, and the external supplier replies back that they do have enough stock and they can help. And here we are able to now create a PO quickly through the system and get that extra inventory to cover up for our shortage. Now, yes, you have heard, okay, this is fine, but what about tracking to make sure that we are receiving that shipment and it's not at risk? So here's where the power of integrating with the third-party systems, in this case, Overhaul, which we brought in as a third-party ISV, comes into play, where you can track the shipment details of for the POs that we have. So it's fine, and as we go in 2 days down the line, we see automated alert notification that there's an electronic temperature control system malfunctioning, which would affect the shipment. So since we have this tool right in our fingertips, we can also go and see what is investigate the details and also mitigate that by having alternate source of modes of transportation here. And finally, how do we have the seamless integration with our providers, in this case FedEx, to add them as a quick provider and to able to send our the shipments to be able to meet the customer demand. And so the results are also shown in this fulfillment insight dashboard, where we are now able to ship that through FedEx to our customers and see an on-time pickup increase and also on-time delivery increase. So without leaving the system, we are able to compose our tailored supply chain ecosystems with the systems we are working on to solve a disruption. And this is huge for many customers out there because this is their day-to-day challenge. So we are seeing AI is playing a significant role in supply chain management. So as you know, AI has always been part of supply chain management because of the vast amount of data and processes we support. But in the future, and what we are already seeing is it will be available to each and every daily workers on the supply chain, empowering them to do more with less. So examples are, for examples like guide the users with what to do, how to fix it. So more of the document Q&A sort of thing. Empowering users with finding data insights from the data through some data Q&A. Optimizing decisions such as where do I procure from, what are my alternate suppliers, how do I place inventory across my network, and finally able to run autonomously and users managed by exceptions. And I would also say this ChatGPT is playing an important role, and we are already seeing the benefits of that.
Well, thank you very much for that. It's very interesting what you mentioned around getting news around your supply chain as a news source. How does this actually work? So where do we put, as a organization, where do you find these news sources? How do you collect them and know that this is a trustworthy source and I know this is really happening, whatever it might be, good or bad?
Yeah, very good question. So this is one of the module that we have in the supply chain center called AI News. It is using the beauty of this module is you can set up this to get news on any supply chain topics. So you can have news around your warehouses, your vendor locations, particular products you're interested in, and AI does the work behind the scenes. So we are using some sort of Bing technology to collect the news that are relevant for us, using many AI methods of also finding what's the relevant news, finding out what are the outliers, and only showing the news that are relevant for the customers. So there's a lot of clustering and outlier detection or other AI methods happening behind the scenes to make sure that the right news is shown to you. And also there's a user feedback, so that if you say, okay, this is not showing the correct news for me, that will be used to train the models and increase the accuracy of the learning.
And one of the things we also spoke as a question in our previous conversations was around Microsoft's role in the supply chain of other companies. Where do you see yourself as a organization providing this service and helping people to find what they should do in their supply chain?
Yeah, a very good question. So I would say, for example, if you look at what is our challenges that we can solve for a supply chain, there's no dearth of it. There's so many challenges we can solve in supply chain. But if you look at what is the macro level thing that we focus on, it is still the data problem. So customers, like I've shown you, have still multiple systems which are disconnected. Bringing insights from all this data and also able to take action has been a very much challenge. So many customers have actually built some control towers, as you have seen. It's been famous over the last years, but it didn't necessarily give the thing that they're looking for. They are able to create nice dashboards and reporting, but then taking insights and taking action from there was pretty much missing. And this is where we focus on heavily is called a supply chain command center, where the focus is not just on insights but also taking actions. So both AI recommendations on what to do and also taking actions. So our low code, no code agility with Power Automate, able to create actions in the target systems is what we focus on here.
And around the taking actions, I think there are two bits for me. Maybe you will be able to add or remove more, but around skills, as in what type of skills will be needed, not just to operate something as similar to what you showed us as the dashboard, but also understand what is behind all these numbers and the AI generated news. What do you think has to change when it comes to supply chain management in order for us to make the most out of AI?
Yes, I think to make most out of the AI, the traditional, it's also it's not AI can solve. There's a lot of changes that need to happen fundamentally, right? So it's bringing people, processes, and technologies all well together, and AI is just a means to show the output that can be taken. So there's processes moving away from siloed operations to more of a and also siloed and also going from a monolithic hard rip and replace sort of things to more of a composable architecture, so that we don't worry about big long implementations to change things, but use your existing things, but use a technology platform which can bring things along and also able to generate that digital twin from which you can generate these insights. So I would say, first of all, moving away from that siloed approach at every level, right? Not only from the its organization level, across the data level and also systems level.
And the other thing you mentioned, and for which Microsoft is extremely famous for at the moment, certainly is ChatGPT. Where do you see it as application being involved in business decisions, whether now or later at some point?
Yes. So ChatGPT has really transformed already. It transformed my work too. So a lot of so it is now making supply chain systems more friendly to the supply chain operators. So I can easily talk with the supply chain systems. So this is where I think ChatGPT will take. So for example, we have released many of our own ChatGPT capabilities. One example of that is proactive supplier collaboration. So, for example, you are seeing the smart news that you are seeing, where it shows you the disruptions. Now, I have an ability to click on one of the news, select my supplier, and boom, I have an email drafted to my supplier about asking, hey, I've sensed a disruption, and these are all the affected POs that are coming in. What is your mitigation activity? So the task that used to take hours to create that email, identifying what POs to look for, this is now automated through ChatGPT. And we are seeing, and we already released that, we are seeing traction on such things. And also fundamentally in our ERP and also in many of our systems, having a data Q&A where users can directly ask questions to the system without going and creating complex filter criteria or preparing meetings. For example, if you go to SNOP type of meetings, preparing that huge amount of materials like PowerPoints, all these can definitely be automated with the generative capabilities of ChatGPT.
And how many mature organizations, if it is easy to not necessarily count them, but on average, how many mature organizations do you think are out there that can really benefit from not just ChatGPT and Microsoft, but AI and higher level technology in the supply chain? Have we reached a critical level where it is really making an impact?
I think this, with the recent invent of ChatGPT, we are going with the masses now. It's earlier, it was only the companies who could afford this AI, big data scientists were the thing. Now it's no longer the case. With the APIs that are being provided to able to have APIs to ChatGPT and integrate with your own apps, it's revolutionary. And we are seeing an uptick in most of the companies starting to look into ChatGPT, inherit this capabilities. It'll be probably an year out there or year or two before a lot of software vendors put this inherent capabilities in their solutions. But this is already out there, and many partners and SIs are starting to put this in front of customers.
Well, Raghav, thank you very much for your time. And for everyone watching right now, you can learn also a bit more a bit later after the event around what Microsoft is doing in the supply chain and the role of AI a bit later. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks for having me.
And this is all we have for today. You will be able to receive more information after from our speakers, as well as the recordings from the event. And you're all invited to our logistics networking and roundtable with Every, Descartes, British Land, Zedify, Backhouse Johnson, the 24th of May in London. You will also receive an invitation by email if you have registered for the online event today. To register for this one as well. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you also to our speakers, and enjoy the rest of your day.